The feed began with silence. A single image dominated the screen. A line of kneeling men, their hands bound behind their backs, heads bowed. The soldiers' uniforms were torn, caked in dried blood, their bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of torture. They were American prisoners of war captured in a doomed battle against the Galactic Empire. Their faces, though bruised and gaunt, held no fear. They stared forward with defiance, even as their executioners stood behind them, tall, armored figures gripping energy blades that pulsed with unnatural light. A figure stepped into view. Clad in flowing robes, the Imperial warlord spoke with the arrogance of a conqueror addressing the defeated. His voice, heavy with contempt, echoed across the galaxy as the broadcast reached billions. "These are the so-called warriors of humanity," he said, gesturing toward the prisoners. "Pathetic, weak. Their resistance was an insult. And now we correct their mistake." The executioners raised their weapons. One by one, the soldiers were cut down. Not a single one begged. The last to die was a Marine captain, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He locked eyes with the camera before the blade took him, as if daring the galaxy to remember. Then the screen flickered. The Empire's symbol loomed for a brief second before the feed cut to black. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a new image replaced the void. A simple phrase, written in red against the darkness. 3 words. "Retribution is coming." The message held for 3 full seconds before the broadcast collapsed into static, severing the Empire's carefully orchestrated display of dominance. Panic rippled through their ranks. Communications officers scrambled to recover the signal, to regain control. But they never did. Across the galaxy, wherever the Empire had forced its transmission, the message remained burned into screens. The meaning was clear. Humanity had seen, and humanity would not forget. Deep beneath the surface of a dead world, in the cold, artificial light of an underground war room, the broadcast ended. A heavy silence settled over the assembled officers, broken only by the distant hum of machinery. They had known it would happen. The Empire had made their intentions clear. Humanity's defiance would be answered with brutality. But knowing had done nothing to temper the rage boiling beneath their skin. A chair scraped against the floor as a man pushed himself up. Colonel Derek Vaughn, a veteran of too many wars, exhaled slowly through his nose. His eyes, dark and calculating, swept across the room. Every man here was American, hand-picked from the best the shattered remains of Earth's military had to offer. Vaughn had fought with most of them. He trusted all of them. "That was a message," Vaughn said, his voice even. "They wanted us to kneel, to fear them." He glanced at the screen, at the lingering echo of the Empire's arrogance. But they made a mistake. They forgot who we are. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Every man in this room understood what came next. It wasn't a question of whether they would strike back. That had never been in doubt. The only question was how hard they would hit. The war had not begun today. It had started the moment the Empire laid its hands on Earth's people. But now it was personal. The executions had not broken them. They had forged something colder, harder, more ruthless. A flicker of movement caught Vaughn's eye. Across the room, a lone figure stood in the shadows. She had been silent throughout the broadcast, her face unreadable. But now, as she stepped forward, the weight of her presence settled over the room like a storm gathering strength. General Evelyn Carter. She was a name whispered across the ranks, a legend among the resistance. The Empire had long dismissed rumors of her existence as human propaganda, a phantom leader conjured to give false hope. They were wrong. Carter moved with the precision of someone who had spent her life in the business of war. Her dark hair, streaked with the faintest hints of silver, was pulled back in a severe knot. She looked at Vaughn, then at the others, her expression unyielding. "They killed prisoners," she said, voice steady. "They made a spectacle of it." No one needed to confirm it. They had all seen. She inhaled sharply, as if tasting the weight of the moment. "I want a full operational plan in 2 hours. We will not strike blind. We will not lash out in anger. Her gaze swept across the room, sharp as a blade. We will be precise. We will be relentless. And we will remind the galaxy that humanity does not forgive. A beat of silence. Then a single nod from Vaughn. The meeting ended without ceremony. No one needed a rallying cry. The mission was already clear. The Empire thought it had won. It had only signed its own death warrant. As the officers filed out, Carter remained behind. She turned back to the screen, where the words still lingered, glowing faintly in the dim light. Retribution is coming. She allowed herself a single breath before she moved. There was work to be done. The war machine had been set into motion. Plans were not debated, they were executed. The underground war room became the heart of an operation that would alter the course of human resistance. No wasted words, no unnecessary movements. Every man present had long since learned the cost of hesitation. The fleet was gathered in the cold silence of space, hidden in the shattered remains of a dead star system. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense. There were no massive dreadnoughts, no lumbering cruisers bristling with heavy cannons. The Empire held dominion over such displays of power. Humanity, backed into a corner, had been forced to evolve. What remained of their naval forces was lean, efficient, and brutal in its simplicity. It had been built not to conquer, but to strike. General Carter stood at the center of the command deck, eyes fixed on the projection before her. A rotating image of a fortress world, its defenses outlined in crimson. This was their target. Not a capital, not a key strategic point, but a symbol. It was the very installation from which the execution broadcast had been transmitted. The Empire had intended for that moment to instill fear. It had only painted a target on its back. "Confirm fleet positions," Carter ordered, her voice steady. "All squadrons in place," Vaughn replied, his tone as sharp as the air in the room. "Ghost teams ready for infiltration. Boarding teams prepped. Just waiting on your word." Carter exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. There would be no second chances. Every variable had been measured, every contingency accounted for. Yet war was war, and no plan survived first contact unchanged. Execute. The word had barely left her lips before the strike began. Across the void, ships that should not have existed flickered into motion. Humanity had learned that survival meant adaptation, and nowhere was this more evident than in their vessels. Cloaking technology, stolen and refined from their enemies, wrapped them in the darkness of space. The Empire believed their superiority was absolute. They had never considered the possibility that humanity had been watching, learning, preparing for the moment the scales would tip. On the surface of the fortress world, alarms blared. Imperial commanders, long accustomed to complacency, scrambled to respond. Their enemy should not have been here. Their defenses, designed to crush frontal assaults, were useless against an enemy that did not fight conventionally. The first explosions came from within. Imperial weapon stockpiles, their locations mapped long before the assault, were ignited by unseen hands. Sabotage had begun before the enemy had even known they were under attack. Barracks burned, supply lines ruptured, and confusion spread like wildfire. It was the kind of chaos that only came from a force that knew exactly where to strike. Within minutes, ground teams were in motion. The first wave hit like a scalpel, not a hammer. This was not a battle for territory. It was an execution of precision, a reminder to the Empire that humanity did not forget. Carter monitored the operation from orbit, her expression unreadable. Vaughn stood beside her, silent but alert, eyes scanning the tactical readouts. Reports streamed in, targets eliminated, sabotage successful, minimal resistance. The Empire had been caught unprepared. Then a shift. A single transmission broke through the silence. "Prisoners located." The words carried weight. There had been no guarantee that any had survived. The Empire was efficient in its cruelty. Yet now, confirmation. "Status?" Carter asked, already calculating the next steps. "Alive. Some in critical condition. More than we anticipated." A flicker of something passed over her face. Then it was gone. "Secure them," she said. "Extract priority 1. I want every last one out." The operation escalated. What had begun as a surgical strike now turned into an extraction under fire. The Empire, finally understanding the scale of what was happening, scrambled to respond. Their forces surged, but it was too late. They were fighting shadows, phantoms that struck and vanished before counterattacks could land. The first transport lifted off under heavy fire, its hull scorched but intact. Others followed. Each carried the remnants of those the Empire had deemed broken. Some were barely conscious, others clung to the soldiers who had dragged them from their cages. None had expected rescue. Vaughn monitored the evacuations, his focus unwavering. "We're reaching critical point," he noted. "Enemy fleet is scrambling. If we're going to make an exit, it's now or never." Carter didn't hesitate. "Pull them out. Full retreat." The order was given. The final transport cleared the surface just as the first enemy ships emerged from hyperspace. A second later, the human fleet vanished, slipping back into the void before the Empire could retaliate. The operation had lasted 47 minutes. The cost was minimal. The damage incalculable. In the silence that followed, the surviving prisoners sat among their rescuers, their faces a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. Some had not spoken in months, their voices stolen by torture and isolation. Others whispered questions, still unable to grasp the reality of their rescue. One man, a Marine who had been marked for execution, looked up as Vaughn approached. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "They said no one was coming," he murmured. Vaughn met his gaze. They were wrong. Carter stood at the helm, watching as the ruined world shrank behind them. She did not allow herself relief. There was still much to be done. This was not over. It had only just begun. The aftershock of the raid rippled across the Galactic Empire like a storm breaking against fragile glass. There had been no official announcement from the High Command, no immediate retaliation, just silence, a heavy, unnatural pause that signaled a reality they had yet to accept. A human fleet had not only infiltrated one of their most fortified prison worlds, but had taken their captives back, leaving nothing behind but smoldering wreckage and dead Imperial soldiers. That kind of humiliation did not go unanswered. The only question was how long it would take before the Empire struck back. Aboard the command carrier Valkyrie, General Carter watched the decrypted transmissions flicker across the holoScreen. Imperial fleets were mobilizing across multiple sectors. Their response was swift, aggressive, and above all, desperate. They were not hunting, they were lashing out, clawing at shadows. The Empire was vast, powerful beyond measure, but it had grown complacent. For centuries, it had known only dominance, never true resistance. That was no longer the case. Vaughn leaned against the table, scanning the data. "They're panicking." Carter didn't look away from the screen. "They're adapting." "They're making mistakes," Vaughn countered. "Pulling forces from key sectors, spreading themselves thin." They weren't ready for this. Carter exhaled slowly, calculating. Every decision now had to serve the greater war effort. Humanity had won a battle, but wars were not won by single victories. The rescued prisoners had been transported to secured locations, undergoing medical treatment, debriefing, reconditioning. Some would return to fight. Others had endured too much. Regardless, they had been given a chance. That mattered. Now came the hard part. "Our window is small," Carter said finally. "The Empire will stabilize. We need to strike again before that happens." Vaughn nodded. "We already have a target in mind." He gestured toward the screen. A new projection emerged, a fleet yard, nestled deep within Imperial space. One of the primary construction sites for the warships that had once crushed human resistance. It had been thought untouchable, but so had the prison world. Carter studied the layout. It was a fortress, layers upon layers of defenses designed to ensure no enemy ever reached its core. Any conventional assault would be suicide, which meant they had to be unconventional. She glanced at Vaughn. "Ghost teams." "Already in position," he confirmed. "They'll create a backdoor. We'll hit them from the inside." There was no hesitation. The plan took shape with brutal efficiency. The Empire had always assumed they would dictate the war, that they alone could choose where and when battles occurred. That illusion had to be shattered. The moment they were forced to react instead of command, the balance shifted. Orders were issued, movements set in motion. Every operative knew their role, every soldier understood what was at stake. There would be no fallback, no rescue operation. This mission was all or nothing. Hours later, the strike began. From the Empire's perspective, there was no warning, no telltale signs of an approaching attack. Their first indication of trouble came when their own security systems betrayed them. Glass doors malfunctioned, shielding barriers deactivated, targeting systems refused to lock onto the intruders. It was the work of ghosts, human operatives who had infiltrated unnoticed, unraveling the station from within before the first shot was even fired. When the assault finally came, it was surgical. The human fleet did not engage the Empire's defensive forces head-on. Instead, they struck only where it mattered. Power conduits were severed, reactor control systems hijacked. The fleet yard became a death trap for its own defenders. Confusion turned to chaos, then to terror. Carter remained in orbit, overseeing every move. The mission was proceeding as planned. Vaughn's voice came through the comms, steady and sharp. Docking bays secured. Sabotage teams moving into position. We're 20 minutes from detonation. Understood, Carter replied. Ensure all teams extract before final sequence. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. They weren't here to seize control. They were here to cripple the Empire's ability to wage war. Every vessel in production would be obliterated. The Empire's ability to recover from such a loss would be measured in years, not months. Then a change. A new signal appeared on the holoscreen, an Imperial distress beacon from within the fleet yard. A high-priority transmission repeating a single phrase. Human prisoners detected. Carter's jaw tightened. That changed everything. Vaughn, she said, already recalculating. New priority. Locate those prisoners. There was no hesitation. Copy that. Moving now. The clock was against them. The detonation sequence had already begun. They had less than 20 minutes before the fleet yard turned into a fireball. But leaving prisoners behind was not an option. Inside the facility, Vaughn and his team moved with relentless precision. They found the holding cells within minutes, taking down what little resistance remained. The captives inside were barely alive, emaciated, beaten, but still breathing. We have them, Vaughn reported, but they're not in any condition to move fast. Carter's mind worked through the possibilities. Extraction would take too long. They needed an alternative. Then an idea. Get them to Docking Bay 3, she ordered. Vaughn didn't question it. His team carried the prisoners, some barely able to stand, toward the designated hangar. It was a long shot, but Carter knew the fleet yard's construction. That bay had once housed prototype vessels, small, experimental craft the Empire had deemed inefficient. If any were still there, they might have a chance. The minutes bled away as Vaughn's team reached the bay. A single ship remained untouched, its systems dormant. The Imperials had likely forgotten it even existed. Vaughn's voice came through the comms. It's intact. Barely. It'll fly, Carter said. Get them aboard. Now. There was no room for debate. The ship roared to life, its engines flickering with unsteady power as Vaughn's team forced it into motion. It lifted off, sluggish but functional. The first explosion rocked the fleet yard. Carter watched from orbit as the fire spread. The station was collapsing, torn apart from within. Then a streak of light as the small vessel broke free, escaping the inferno just as the fleet yard detonated in full. A chain reaction of destruction engulfed the Empire's war machine. Vaughn's voice came through, breathless but firm. We're clear. Relief was brief. The Empire had lost more than a facility. They had lost control of the war's momentum. That meant their next move would be unpredictable. Carter stared at the destruction below. There would be no going back from this. She turned away from the view, already preparing for what came next. The war was far from over. But for the first time, the Empire knew what it meant to fear. The aftermath of the strike rippled through the Empire's ranks like a wound torn open too deep to mend. Intelligence reports confirmed what Carter had suspected. Their fleet yard's destruction was not just a tactical loss, but a psychological rupture. The once invincible war machine of the Empire had been forced to acknowledge something it had never before considered possible. Humanity had struck the first decisive blow, and now, for the first time, the Empire was on the defensive. But victory was never about a single battle. The real war was about to begin. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Carter studied the latest tactical reports. Imperial forces had regrouped faster than expected, consolidating their strength in nearby sectors. Their response was not mindless retaliation, but calculated vengeance. High Command had realized they could no longer dismiss humanity as a nuisance. The Empire's next move would be swift and merciless. They needed to make a statement. Carter had already anticipated their target. Vaughn stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes locked on the data feed. "They're coming for our forward command post." She nodded. "They won't just hit it. They'll erase it." The post was more than a strategic asset. It was the heart of humanity's resistance in the sector. Every offensive operation had been coordinated from there, every strike planned within its walls. If the Empire destroyed it, they wouldn't just cripple military operations, they'd crush morale. That could not be allowed to happen. The enemy had made one critical mistake. They assumed that humanity would respond by defending the post directly, throwing everything they had into a desperate last stand. Carter had no intention of playing by their rules. Defense was not the way to win this war. The only answer was to attack. "We let them come," she said, voice even. "Then we take the fight to them." Vaughn exhaled slowly. "That's a lot of risk." "It's the only way," she replied. "If we defend, we lose. We hit them before they strike, and we dictate the fight." She turned to the hollow display, outlining the plan with cold precision. They would allow the Empire's forces to deploy, let them think they had the upper hand. Then they would gut them from within. The Valkyrie would not be in orbit to protect the post. It would be leading the assault on the Empire's own staging ground, the very place their attack was being coordinated from. It was a gamble, but the alternative was waiting for destruction. That was not an option. Every available ship was prepared, every soldier briefed with ruthless efficiency. There would be no reinforcements, no second chances. The Empire believed humanity would break under overwhelming force. They had yet to see what happened when humans fought with their backs against the wall. Hours later, the battle began. The Empire's forces descended upon the command post, expecting resistance. Instead, they found silence. No defensive batteries. No ground forces. Just an empty installation waiting for them. They hesitated, and in that moment of doubt, the trap was sprung. The Valkyrie and its fleet tore into the Empire's staging ground with brutal efficiency. Their supply lines severed, their command chain disrupted, their fleet thrown into chaos before their ground forces even realized what was happening. It was not a siege. It was an execution. Carter's orders were clear. No drawn-out battle. No wasted engagements. Cut the throat and let the body die. Vaughn and his teams moved through the enemy ranks like ghosts, striking hard and vanishing before counterattacks could land. Entire warships were left dead in space, their systems shredded from within. The Imperial forces on the ground realized too, late, that they had walked into a graveyard. With no reinforcements, no communication with command, their invasion force collapsed into disarray. Some tried to retreat. Most did not get the chance. It was over in hours. What was meant to be the Empire's decisive strike had turned into their worst defeat yet. Their fleet crippled, their soldiers slaughtered, their war effort shaken to its core. The message was clear. Humanity was not just fighting back. Humanity was winning. As the final Imperial vessel was reduced to wreckage, Carter stood on the bridge, watching the remnants of the battle fade into the void. The war was far from over. The Empire would come again, and next time, they would be more ruthless, more desperate. But it no longer mattered. Humanity had proved the impossible. They had forced the Empire to fear.